Uh, I'm Roland Vogel. I'm Executive Director of CodeX, and it's a pleasure to have you all join us for this session. We have 3 presentations today, so we typically spend about an hour for our meeting. We have Arlindo Ira Filo, who's the founder and CEO of Nexilis Intellectual and Financial Capital. We have Eli Mattern, the CEO and General Counsel of Savvy Suit, and Marcus Lampinen, CEO, and Paul Jerseys, the co-founder of Prefina. So before I turn it over to our speakers, I wanted to check with you all and see if you have any news to share for the group, any updates you wanted to discuss with the group. All right, please go ahead. Please unmute yourself if you want us to hear you, or use the chat function. No, it doesn't seem like there are any updates. In that case, I will just turn it over to Arlindo. Arlindo, are you there?
I'm here. I'm here.
Wonderful. So you have about 20 minutes. We're excited to learn more about what you're up to. Please leave some time for folks to ask questions. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Great. Now you can see me, right?
We can see you, yes, and can hear you well.
Great. So thank you very much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. I had the opportunity of being at SLS a few months ago and talking to Roland. It was great being there. So it's a pleasure to be here with you and talk about Nexilis. Let me share my screen with you because I prepared something and this may help us. Okay.
Arlindo, sorry to interrupt. This is Susan. If you want to try to speak directly into your computer mic, I think that'll help us hear you a little bit better.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Thanks.
Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So let me talk about Nexilis. What Nexilis is, what we do. I'll make sure that I save time for Q&A at the very end, right? But first, let me introduce myself. So I founded Nexilis 2 months ago in the beginning of March. Before that, I was in consulting, and before that in entrepreneurship. I actually built my entire career at the very intersection of finance, business, and law. Started in my hometown, Manaus, in the middle of the Amazon forest in Brazil, as an entrepreneur in a family business. Then when I moved to the US, I started my career with McKinsey, the consulting firm. I was in the Cleveland office for a while and then transferred to the São Paulo office as an associate in 2004 and built my entire career there until I became a partner in 2013 and continued all the way until February this year. There, I was mostly focused in capital-intensive industries, did a lot of electric power, did a lot of infrastructure, and on the functional side, I did a lot of strategy and finance, including on the strategy and finance side, helping one of the leading law firms here in Latin America. Academically, also I was split my time between law and business and finance. So I'll tell you a little bit about Nexilis, starting with our name. And it took us a little while to find a name that would represent what we do, right? And Nexilis came to be that name. It comes from Latin and means woven together or intertwined. And this is exactly what we try to do and try to convey. We're at the very intersection of law, business, and finance. There's also another discipline that we bring, which is negotiation and stakeholder management. And what we aim to do is to create and unlock a lot of value by applying business and finance lenses to legal-based assets and legal situations. I'll explain in a bit what to us are these legal assets, but we do not tackle these assets, liabilities, or situations primarily from a legal standpoint. We actually start from a business and finance standpoint. We understand that although law shapes the form in which this business or situations end up being defined, their content it comes from business or a finance nature from the beginning. And our aspiration as our business evolves is really to create a market for these legal assets. We believe that the opportunity is big. We see a lot of value being unlocked and created in these assets or liabilities being closed out, worked out, or simply changing hands, and we providing liquidity for whoever holds them. I'll talk a little bit about these legal assets. It's something that is actually, there isn't a good definition, or I haven't come across a universal definition of what these legal assets would be. So I took the liberty of giving my own definition based on what I could research. But for us, legal assets would be anything of value that is away from the mainstream asset classes. So we're not talking about public or private equity. We're not talking about public or private debt. We're not talking about real estate. We're not talking about traditional funds. And to meet the criteria, it has to be something that can be transferred by contract. And we came up with 6 different classes that would meet these criteria and would therefore be in the portfolio of assets that we'll work with. So the first one would be the assignment of any rights from corporate contract. So anything that is a promise that parties exchange between themselves would fit this definition, either individually or collectively. So imagine a situation of a corporation that decides to terminate their businesses in a given country. They would pay off all their debts and liabilities, but would be left with an array of assets or contractual relationships that they can't very easily monetize. So we would get a hold of all these assets and work with them on behalf of this corporation. We also want to work with corporate disputes, lawsuits, and arbitrations, even with disputes that haven't been judicialized or put to arbitration yet. This is actually the first class of assets that we're going to work with. We also want to work with rights of use of physical or intangible assets, warrants, or creditors' position registered in any clearing or exchange. So we want anything that has value that bears no execution risk because someone else has already certified that the title is good and that we can transfer the title by merely changing the name of the holder in a clearing, depository, or in an exchange. We want to work with complex NPLs, the non-performing loans. So any troubled credit where there is a dispute about the certainty of the credit, whether the title is good or not, and whenever there is a possibility for a new recovery or a new collection model. We want to work with intellectual property in general, and another class that we like very much are undivided states. So any right that a heir has in a state would be something that would also work with. The next question that we asked ourselves was whether there will be materiality, whether there will be opportunity for us to work, and we believe so, right? These are just figures from Brazil. There's a market of over $2 trillion in outstanding corporate and tax litigation. It's over 80 million active cases. The judicial system doesn't work very well. On average, it takes 10 years to get a judicial opinion and enforce a judgment. There's over 500 billion in corporate contracts signed every year in the country, excluding M&A, and over $40 billion a year in new states that needs to be settled and adjudicated. And if you consider that the judicial system doesn't work very well and it takes very long to resolve any dispute, you see that the transaction costs in these assets are huge and the value destruction is massive. So we wanna make sure that we can get in, and we want to make sure that we can restructure these assets and liabilities. And this is how we do it. This is where our logo comes from. We essentially want to unlock value by doing 4 things. And if we can do these 4 things at the same time, the more value we believe we're going to unlock. We want to create new business models. We want to redefine the financial equation. We want to negotiate and align the stakeholders and governance. And we want to do all the legal engineering alongside the counsel of the parties. So we, as I said, we come from a business and finance angle, first and foremost, and work alongside the counsel to come up with solutions that counsel alone wouldn't probably be in the best position to do. We will start with 3 service lines. Litigation is the first of our asset classes that we'll work with. We'll start with high stakes claims. It'll be single or in portfolio. So anything above 20 million for single claims, or a portfolio, I would say 100 million or more, would be material enough to justify our engagement in any sector. We will also work with small claims. These would be in portfolio, and we would be serving claims or working with claims from the telecom, from airlines, from banks, and from the utilities industries. And we'll also do insurance and bank. Here we'll do either single names or single situations or portfolios. And for here, we're gonna work with rights of recovery for insurance companies. We're gonna do non-performing loans for banks. And we are gonna work with pre-bankruptcy claims, hopefully even in an attempt to avert bankruptcy. What we do, as I said, we bring this business and finance lens. Here, I'm just showing you an example of a particular solution that we would bring. This is a financial evaluation of an entire portfolio of claims. We would treat these claims as a portfolio manager of a financial assets would, right? So we would be doing net present value calculations, forecasting cash flows, understanding volatility, understanding what causes the value of the portfolio to go up and down, and understanding even how the portfolio exposure varies by asset class. We would also bring, if we were to work on the portfolio, all the mechanics for financial modeling and for negotiation. So if we take a claim, we're gonna do all the mathematical modeling of how that claim may unravel. We're gonna model the decision nodes and the probabilistic nodes. We're gonna find optionalities and externalities to maximize the value of the claim and expand the pie. And we're gonna do all the modeling for wetness, and the multi-stage utility values. When we do that, we can create bargaining zones, we can create offer packages that expand the pie, and we can create a negotiation framework for the parties. And then hopefully we can negotiate and close, therefore monetize a part of the portfolio. We can also do more sophisticated modeling for settlements, for instance. Starting with a reverse logic, it is sometimes very hard for lawyers to predict exactly what the outcome of a claim will be. So we do the other way around. We start with a given offer and we understand what parameters in terms of probability of winning and time to resolution have to be for that offer to be good. And with that, we can bring a lot of managerial insight to the owners of these claims and help them get into action. And finally, if we look how we're going to evolve, we start right now as a structuring and financing firm. We'll do a lot of consulting, but our end goal is really to evolve our model into creating a market infrastructure firm. So hopefully some years down the road, we're going to have a pricing tape, we're going to have a clearinghouse, we're going to have a depository, we're going to have a registrar, and we'll be able to make sure that all these assets that we talked to you about become liquid and can be easily traded by everyone. This is my contact information. There is the QR code on the right. Our website is already live. It's nexelise.com.br. And I'll open now for Q&A.
Great. Well, thank you, Arlindo. This is very cool. It's a very short time, a very small print of you for your email address. So you might want to just put it into the chat. So if people want to reach out to you.
Yep.
I'll do that right now. Let's see if anyone has any questions for Arlindo. My first question actually would be, yeah, Bruce Kahan has a question. Go ahead, please.
So, great presentation. And I'm wondering how your model as a merchant bank is different than the merchant banks that you see or the factors that you see operating in Brazil, and what traction, if any, you've gotten in discussions with them.
Yeah. So do we take all questions or do we respond one by one?
I would take it one by one. We have only about great. 3 more minutes. So okay, great.
So Bruce, banks would actually be our clients, right? So banks, they're very good, especially or at least in Brazil, they are very good at collecting, at structuring and collecting traditional debt, right? They're not very good at structuring or collecting legal assets. So one thing that we want to do, we want to sweep their entire portfolio of loans and see whether we find people who owe them money, but also are creditors in lawsuits. We want to bring the two together, and we're going to make sure that they finance the outcome of those lawsuits and get the first dollar in whatever money is collected from the award. We also want to make sure that for whatever debt that they have that is becoming troubled, we offer them a business solution working alongside with the debtor, right? One example that I had was an insurance company that had some claims outstanding from the financing of medical equipment. They wanted simply to tender those claims to lawyers. When I analyzed the portfolio of claims, I realized that most of the claims originated from poor sales decisions. So it was a salesman of medical equipment with poor incentives that put over-spec equipment in clinical facilities that clearly did not have a demand for that equipment. So my suggestion there were actually to pay money to the debtor so that the debtor would peacefully return the equipment to the insurance company, would put a smaller and less costly equipment at those facilities, and we would change the nature from a debt relationship to a wet lease with a lockbox that would give us first title to whatever money was paid to that medical facility.
So you are acting as a merchant banker, Arlindo?
No, no,
my question was,
no,
are
no, we're
you,
not. We're
or
not.
are
we
you
will
are
not.
an intermediary?
Yeah. So we're more of an investment banking that would be advising in an M&A situation, for instance, than a merchant bank. We're not putting our capital right now. We're structuring situations for other people to put capital.
Okay. And so this sounds like this consulting is your initial use case, and your customers can be banks or law firms or insurance companies. But then you'll, in the long run, you also want to do sort of this kind of predictive analytics on lawsuits, or maybe that's also already part of the consulting.
Yeah.
What techniques are you using for that?
Yeah, so we're gonna do, we're already using predictive, but we're actually, at least for our country, and say for small claims, because small claims is a different game. For high stakes litigation, I believe we're still several years before we can have something that is really reliable and useful. So what we're doing reverse probability. We're assessing what would have to be true for a given settlement offer be good or not, and we're discussing with our clients to see whether a particular range is acceptable for them.
Okay, great. So we're already running a little bit over time, Arlindo. This is very cool. I ask everyone who has questions for additional questions for Arlindo, please send him an email. And he just shared his email through the chat. Yep. And you see that Scott asked you a question there through the chat. Maybe you can kind of address it directly. Well, Arlindo, thank you so much for joining us.
It was great being here.
Yeah, quick round of applause, and please keep us posted. And I will turn it over to our next speaker now, who's Eli. Thank you, Arlindo. Please, if you could unshare your screen, that would be great.
Thank you.
Eli, thanks again, Arlindo. We'll talk soon. Stay safe. Okay, Eli, are you there?
I am.
There you are. Okay, great. I was expecting
a guy,
but this is Sarah Eli. Okay, I get it.
So it's Ellie. And
okay.
In the chat, no problem.
Great to have you.
Happy to be here. I'm super excited. I appreciate the invitation. In the chat, I went ahead and put my contact information. That was a great idea to just put it right in the chat. So thank you for having me. I am thrilled to be here. So for now for something completely different. I am an attorney, and my company is a software development company in Florida, and we build primarily access to justice tools. And I'm going to talk through some of the projects that we are working on in what I like to call the Wonka Factory. So a little bit about us. My background is in access to justice. I graduated law school and immediately became a legal aid staff attorney, and I worked for legal aid for 7 years, and I met my co-founder Jenny at that time, who was a second career attorney and also a software engineer. And so we founded SavvySuit in 2014 to start building tools that we wished we had as legal aid practitioners, as well as legal aid, or as well as things for our clients. One of the coolest projects that I'm most excited about that we're working on at the moment, we like to codename all of our projects, and we call it codename Mycroft, in case anyone's a Sherlock Holmes fan. And it is a machine learning model with the ability to issue spot consumer protection issues. And we are building it as a pilot right now to see if it can recognize out of natural language inputs from an actual customer, whether it will start to recognize 10 areas of law that are under the consumer protection umbrella. So foreclosure, bankruptcy, and we've inputted hundreds of thousands of data inputs, and we're getting ready to roll that out ideally in the next few months to start putting new live data from applicants to legal aid into Mycroft to see how well he does. We'll be doing that through a chatbot system with a legal aid partner here in Florida. Sorry, I forgot to mention this when I started. If anybody has questions, please feel free to ask them as we go, and I will try to address them, in line.
Sounds good, thanks. And yeah, and if I see somebody chatting a question, I will let you know.
Great, thank you. So SavvySuit's flagship software, the software that we are most known for, is Pro Bono Matters. And some of you may be attorneys, and some of you have done pro bono in the past. And one of the constant frustrations for pro bono attorneys is that they could be multiple organizations in a given geographic area that needs pro bono assistance. But they're not always super forthcoming about the area of law they do, because they want as many volunteers as possible. So for example, Pro Bono Matters was founded initially, or thought of, for Miami, where at any given time there are, I believe, 13 different official legal pro bono organizations. And so if you called one of them and you said, hey, I want to help with immigration, but that program didn't do immigration, they wouldn't necessarily say, well, we don't do it, but this other program does. And so the legal aid or the pro bono attorneys said, look, enough is enough. We're not interested in this anymore. We want to go to one place and be able to pick our own cases. And that was the genesis behind Pro Bono Matters. And so what you're seeing right here is the catalog for Florida. And Florida, since this is where we launched, has 35 different organizations currently using the system. And so you have organizations across the state of Florida who post cases that are available right now and where they need attorneys to take those cases. And attorneys can say that they're interested in, so I'm in Orlando, and we can check out and see what's there. One of the fun and exciting things around Pro Bono Matters is not only did we get to make it easier for people to adopt pro bono cases, we also did a lot of learning and education for the legal aid organizations themselves around sales and marketing. And so crafting the case cards themselves has been a really fun experiment and challenge. And we have seen some fabulous case cards. There was one out of Tallahassee where somebody put a probate case that was Billie Jean is not my lover. And another one out of Jacksonville where somebody said, used car held together with Gorilla Glue, fraud attorney needed. And so those case cards obviously have really great descriptions, and so they got snatched off the site very quickly. But we are excited to have Pro Bono Matters move outside of Florida, and starting about 1.5 years ago, we started with a few other programs, including the American Immigration Lawyers Association is posting cases around the country for their demographic. And then most recently, we onboarded Middle Tennessee and some of the organizations in Tennessee and also around the country. And so we're ever expanding the Pro Bono Matters catalog to showcase pro bono opportunities, because candidly, as an attorney, I want to make it as easy as possible for people to take cases, but also I want pro bono attorneys to have a very positive experience. And historically, it has been kind of difficult, and having the ability to window shop or online shop for a pro bono case gives a lot more autonomy to the new pro bono attorney who may be unsure or uncomfortable with just calling and saying they want a case. It gives them a better feeling of security around what they want to do. So Pro Bono Matters started, and we were trying to solve a very niche problem. We wanted to make it easy and have one robust marketplace for pro bono cases. But we've evolved, and in the 2 years that since we've launched, we've learned a lot. And so we've got a lot of development coming down the pipeline. One of which is the search bar itself. We had initially had drop-down menus, and that was very well received by a certain demographic of the population, preferred that to a search box. And so we are bringing back an advanced search functionality, which will allow attorneys to save their areas of interest and their geographic location and get automated updates anytime a new case is posted that matches their descriptions. As well as we're moving into redesigning the case cards, because as I say very frequently, we have never had somebody accidentally take a family law case, but we have had many people accidentally sign up for cases in areas that they were not. And so we wanted to make it really clear where the cases were located. And so we're adding a map feature to the center of the card. If you take a look at the card on the right, that is the new case card redesigns, where we are moving away from colors to iconography, and we're having the case location much more noticeably present so that it's easier for a volunteer to see where it is, so we don't accidentally have attorneys from Miami take cases in Jacksonville. Though one of the cool things that we've learned from Pro Bono Matters is that if the attorney is capable of doing the case remotely, we have had quite a few attorneys intentionally take wills cases or other cases outside of their jurisdiction, because they may say, hey, I go to the Jacksonville office all the time, even though I'm in Tampa. So I'm happy to take that case. And so we've learned that over time as well. And then if you look at the card on the left, another feature that we'll be rolling out by mid to late summer is that we're going to expand into clinic opportunities. Historically, Pro Bono Matters has showcased only or most functionally full representation cases. And a lot of legal aids have ongoing clinics once a month or once every couple of weeks, where they allow attorneys to show up and take cases either for half an hour or an hour. And there was no really good way to track who had signed up for those clinics, and then send automated reminders around that. And then also there was no clear way for them to find those cases always. And we are rolling out the clinic case cards, which we're super excited about, midsummer. And as you can see from kind of the mock-up here in front of you, under event dates, it shows that this would be a clinic that goes once a month. And then somebody could say, well, I'm busy January 1st because I'm going to be celebrating New Year, but February 1st, I would love to help with the Veterans Estate Planning Clinic, and I'll sign up and go through the sign up form and then get automated reminders. And so we have a lot of development still forthcoming on Pro Bono Matters, and we are super proud of the product, because since it launched several years ago, we've helped thousands of people by matching them with pro bono attorneys. And most notably, the attorneys that tend to take cases through Pro Bono Matters are attorneys that had no previous relationship with the pro bono programs. And so I think that we're reaching a new demographic of attorneys by offering this marketplace. And that's what I'm super excited to share with you. And that is what SavvySuit is doing down at the Wonka Factory. And I'm going to wrap up now in case anybody has any questions.
Yeah, a bunch of questions already. So Michael is saying, very cool idea. You really understand the existing conditions for legal services you're offering reflects that. Oh, that's not a question, actually. It's just a compliment.
Oh, thank you, Michael.
And then Lance is asking, for the Mycroft software, are you using Lex NLP or an equivalent legal NLP open source tool, or are you writing the NLP from scratch?
Yes and no. We are working with some existing softwares for NLP, for the natural language processing, but we're also doing some from scratch so we can do comparisons of them. As to what's under the hood, we're trying to keep that proprietary until we roll it out and make sure that it works. And then we will be thrilled to share it with as many legal services as it can benefit, because we want to see, the reason we started with consumer protection law is that if somebody's calling about a domestic violence issue, it would be very easy to overlook an existing foreclosure or bankruptcy issue. And so we want to make sure that consumer protection issues, while sometimes thornier in terms of their fact patterns, aren't overlooked when an attorney or when a client calls and is in dire straits.
Mm-hmm. So I understand, okay, so this is
sorry, one more thing. Dr. Lance or Dr. Elliott, if you'd like to reach out to me personally, I'd love to have a longer conversation with you about the natural language processing offline. I don't want to derail the conversation.
That sounds great. So, so this is your a new product, right? You're sort of the main product is the case, the basically a marketplace for cases. Who do you see as your main customers there? Is it legal aid groups or private law firms who want to do pro bono work, or is it the clients? I mean, I guess in the marketplace it's both sides, but who's paying you?
So legal aid organizations have been our primary customers in that they are paying us for use a license to use our software. But some organizations have gotten sponsors from large law firms where their law firm has sponsored because they said, look, we want to be able to go and choose our own cases. And so sometimes we're being paid by the legal aid, but through a sponsorship from a program, because but we do not generally work specifically with law firms, though they are the intended beneficiaries of the marketplace. It's a great question.
And is that the intention also for the NLP tool, that would be used mostly by legal aid groups, this consumer protection tool?
So the Mycroft tool was intended and built for the legal aid community. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to build something that would be useful for access to justice. That said, we understand that there are implications for law firms and for other realms in the legal sector. And so once we have rolled it out and scaled it and made it actionable for legal aids, and we know that we've gotten the kinks out of the system, we will be looking to see where else in the marketplace it fits.
Cool. Scott is asking, saying, great, in building A2J software and products for the private bar, are you exploring any pro bono law students learning opportunities? And in what ways, hypothetically, could such interns apprentice with licensed attorneys?
Scott, I feel like either you know the answer to this question or you've just teed it up so wonderfully for me. So one of the other projects that SavvySuit does is that once a year for the last 2 years during March Madness, we have worked with the Florida Bar Foundation to do a project we call the Law School Challenge. And we run it as a competition because people and lawyers especially are competitive. One of the things we realized that was wrong with current competitions for pro bono is that if you do it law firm versus law firm, then each firm is on the same team. And so the way we wanted to fix that is that we made it so that everyone plays in Florida for their alma mater. And so the way the Law School Challenge works is that law students can go onto the Pro Bono Matter site. It's a specific Law School Challenge site, and they can select a case that they would be interested in taking. And then that case is held in a holding cell until an attorney agrees to take that case with them. And then that attorney and law student are matched so that the attorney gets the experience, or the law student gets the mentorship and the experience of working on a case that they already had interest in. The lawyer is doing pro bono, and then they each get points for their respective alma maters. So I am a FAMU College of Law grad. And so if I pair with a student from FAMU, then that's 2 points for FAMU College of Law. And if I choose another case that is from a different school, then it would be 1 for each school. And then at the end of the year, last year during the Florida Bar Convention in July, or in June, we had huge gaudy trophies for the Law School Challenge. And it was very fun. And this year it was a little bit derailed by COVID. It ended up a little earlier, but last year and this year we matched, I think, 600 students with lawyers to pair up on cases through the Law School Challenge.
Wow, that's amazing. So, all right, so maybe final question from Bruce. He's asking, will you be able to aggregate consumer protection violators and turn those into class action databases for further prosecution in civil or criminal settings?
It's a great question. So right now we've been training the data set for the machine learning and natural language on existing data, as opposed to inputs from real live applicants to legal aid. And one of the things we're eager to see is the information provided from the actual applicants that will help steer what kinds of information we can get. But you are absolutely correct that we can also tailor some of that to ask certain questions, so that we could be looking for who are, bad actors in consumer protection down the road for class actions or those kinds of impact litigation.
Great. Well, Ellie, thank you so much. This is super cool what you're working on. Thank you so much for sharing with our group. Folks, if you have more questions for Ellie, she put her email address into the chat. It's
I'll put it in there again.
.com. And thank you again for joining us. Quick virtual round of applause. And
thank you again for having me.
Yeah, you stay safe, and thanks for joining us. And yeah, please keep us posted. If you could unshare your screen, please, so I could turn it over to Marcus and Paul. Marcus and Paul, are you guys there?
We are here. So this is Marcus. Hey everyone. Let me just grab the screen over here.
And I see Paul also. Great. Well, take it away.
Awesome. So hey everyone, thank you so much for having us, and thank you, Ellie, for that presentation. That was awesome. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let me know if you have any trouble seeing it, but you should have it here. And then I'm going to follow Ellie's advice and ping over my contact details here. So it'll be Paul and I presenting today. Paul and I, we fought over the control over the screen, and we played rock, paper, scissors, and I won. So I'll be the one with the mouse for now, but he'll jump in here in a little bit. So now for something also slightly different. So I love the diversity in terms of discussion points here. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about data. We're going to be talking about what we're working on at Profina in terms of imagining and creating the new world for data. We're going to talk a little bit about the status quo, where we're starting from. Then Paul is going to chime in with some of the frameworks that we've developed. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the use cases in terms of how we're applying. So let's start off by looking at the data market. So we believe that the current data market is fundamentally broken. And we believe this because of 3 underlying pillars. One is that to build the future technology and applications that we want, the current centralized model just doesn't work. We need data that's actually close to applications. We need data that offers low latency and high availability. And we need data that can actually be processed reliably by the device. So any type of personal AI application that we want on the phone, with the increasing amount of data that we'll have, and then the increasing amount of bandwidth through 5G and so on and so forth, it will just be impossible to deliver those with the current centralized model where we're shipping data on and off to a central database to get it back. Then the other aspect is value, that we're getting increasingly aware that the value from data is not evenly distributed. And even more so than that, it's actually controlled by a few companies, and individuals certainly don't see the value from their own personal data. Data has also been something that's shifted in the last 10 years. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. My own background has involved working with content rights in the past, working in fintech. And one of the things that we've seen in the last 10 years is business plans used to regard data as the gold mine, that you would just hoard all the data in the world to only exploit it later and figure out what you do with it later. Nowadays, data is actually becoming also a liability. There have been countless of data breaches that have cost companies dearly, both directly as well as in reputation. And the cost of compliance for maintaining and complying with bills such as the CCPA here in California, or then, for example, GDPR and countless other ones, that's increased. And then there's dangers from fake data, so on and so forth. But if you look at data today, then it's also a reality that there is somebody that has more data on you than Google, Facebook, Amazon combined. And that's actually you yourself. And new regulations such as GDPR, they've given you more power and control over that, but you need to organize it in a way that it actually creates value. And that's what we do. So we see a future where data actually is controlled by the individuals themselves, where it stays local in a personal cloud, where you can take it with you, you can control who has access to it, but you can also use it for your benefit in different types of interactions. So in our model, the individuals hold their own personal data. Our technology helps them aggregate and centralize that data into their own personal cloud, but they also get to volunteer this data with their explicit permission for certain types of use cases. So they can volunteer it not in the form of raw data, but in the form of data profiles. And I'll come back to this in a bit. But then we also see that by distributing this data into personal clouds, so having individual databases, if you will, as opposed to one database where millions of persons' data actually exists, then that also distributes the footprint and that distributes the risk. Because if I only hold my own data, I don't hold anybody else's data, then yes, my data is incredibly valuable to me, but in reality, it's not worth the effort for somebody to go through a lot of trouble just to get my data. So that's a starting point in terms of what we're building. And here I'll hand over to you, Paul, and you can talk a little bit more about our approach to the legal framework and to the rights associated to this data.
So in this slide, we can see that there are some buzzwords or keywords that have been identified. And once we're trying to think about this user-centric data ecosystem, we also need to understand what could be those guiding principles that could define this new environment where individuals are actually in the middle of interactions. So as Marcus mentioned, once we assume that each and every individual has his and her personal data in personal data cloud, the next natural question is what can individual actually do? What kind of activities or what kind of actions can individual do? And this immediately changes the perspective. We see that by having personal data in my own personal control, I would be actually able to make decisions by myself who can access this data from me. And as Marcus already has just mentioned, we do not see or think that individuals should be actually giving away all of his data. Instead, we're creating these data profile cards
which are separated from overall raw data. And the interaction with the service provider takes place by sharing access to personal data cloud. So in user-centric data model, issues as transparency, security are obviously at the core, but the most crucial question here is how can we actually activate this data and make it truly portable? So as we know, some of these principles are already entrenched in GDPR and CCPA, but some of the core principles of data portability and actual consent or permissions are really so far on a very high level. We can see that especially in European framework, people are suffering from this so-called notice or consent overload. So we're trying to think about the next possible steps, how to make this life of individual user a bit more convenient and actually generating value. So Marcus, maybe you can go to the next slide. So in our model, we see that by interacting with the service providers, individuals are actually in control of their data by having the ability to say which service provider has what kind of access to personal data profile card. And based on this model, we are thinking that it is natural that depending on the nature of relationship with the service provider, the individual will be willing to have different settings or different permissions, different categories of visibility that service providers should have in terms of offering services to the individual. So if you think about some very basic interactions, maybe individual will not be willing to share anything about himself or herself. Whereas in other circumstances, individuals might be willing to provide a much greater visibility and provide more information about himself or herself so that service provider could customize the offering and of course provide more personalized experience. And if we go to the next slide, we devised more or less now rather general framework, and we're thinking that it is time to start considering what are actually these layers of permissions and what are the rights that individual actually has. We are moving from a GDPR or a CCPA environment, which is basically rights-driven environment where individuals are able to access their personal data and get some additional information, what service providers are gathering about them. And we are flipping the coin, and in the next user-centric environment, it will be the individual who will actually give permission to service providers or businesses to access the data that individual has. And if we are diving deeper, so we can see already that in some instances, individuals will provide more access, and others, there will be less. We published an article at maybe 2 months ago in Harvard Journal of Law and Technology. If you're interested, you can quickly find it online. And when it comes to the use cases, Marcus can provide an example.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. So looking at how does this actually work in practice, which is what we care about the most, that at the end of the day, this isn't really just about privacy or security or organizing data, but at the end of the day, it's about providing a better experience for the end user. So if we think about something very simple, that you as a user, you go to a booking site. Let's say that you go to an Airbnb.com, to a booking.com, what have you. You land on the site, and the site has a pop-up that says that, hey, I would like to know what type of traveler you are. Okay, that's what we call a data request. That essentially the service provider, in this case the website, they're actually asking you directly that you know, I'd like to access something about you. And then you as an individual, by having this data in your personal data cloud and having these profiles in your cloud or either on your device, for example, your mobile phone, then you could decide that, okay, you know what, I'm likely going to get a better experience, a better deal, a better offer from this site if I choose to share what type of traveler am I. But it's not binary, it's not black and white. It's rather that, okay, I can decide to share I'll share, for example, my travel profile, but I'm also going to set the terms that I'm going to share this as a one-time use for this specific interaction. So you, the website, can actually offer me a personalized value based on this experience, but that's it. You can't read this afterwards. So that's something that we allow the users to set. We allow them to also create these experiences, but then also manage these rights that they have. So it's not only that you share some data today, but it's that, you know, maybe tomorrow you don't feel right about those choices. So then you come back to that. We're building what we call these personal data apps, and we're creating this framework for developers so that they can build amazing experiences. And that's one of the use cases of what we call a profile app. So you use a personal profile, like a travel profile, to personalize something, but there are countless other experiences. And especially in today's environment, where a lot of stakeholders, they're going online due to the COVID crisis, they oftentimes lack data about their customers. So this is also a great bridge for companies to empower their customers to give them these types of profiles and then be able to provide more competitive value. So from my point of view, we founded a company about a year and a half ago. Before that we were running various different experimentation in this field. And now we're really trying to empower more and more developers to build more and more amazing applications for the future. So that's something that we'd love to get more developers online. We have a public open source GitHub that you can check out. And then we have various different resources that you can check out, both from the perfina.com website or then this open source website and repository that we maintain called Liberty Equality Data. So that's it from my point of view. Would love to take more questions and so on and so forth. And I see, Lance, your question there. So I'm just gonna read this out here. Are you involved in the World Economic Forum's effort that's exploring the role of personal data as a human right, which some refer to as identity, mashup of identity and data? And then how does our approach compare to others that are doing something in this domain? So we definitely see that there's lots of great companies and great organizations that are pursuing this data as a human right. There's, for example, Tim Berners-Lee and their what's it called, Solid Initiative, and there's a lot of other blockchain companies and so on and so forth. We've very much started from a practical user point of view. How is the user's life better in the future because of this? Because let's face it, users care about value. They don't necessarily geek out about data like, well, we might. So we try to be very practical. We also come from a data background. So technology and the framework, that's really, really important. But at the same time, our focus is very much on the value that's created in this exchange. So we talk about activating data, and that's what our focus has been. Daniel asked about our earnings model. So earnings is very tightly linked to signaling and credibility. I did my economics master's in incentive systems, and it's a really, really crucial area to get right in terms of trust. So we believe, and this is something where we're still piloting and working on various different experiments, but we believe that we have to incentivize the value that we create, meaning that the user uses their personal data, their profile through Perfina to get some type of benefit. Let's say they get a discount, or let's say they get a premium experience that they wouldn't get otherwise. Then can we be there where essentially your data saves you money? And then we take a commission of what the value was created or what value was created in that exchange. That's how we see that. Then there's also the app market element, that as developers build apps that are direct to consumers based on the personal data that they have, then that's also where we can facilitate as a marketplace. And then we can come up with more ways to offer value for the consumer, such as anonymous proxies and so on and so forth. So technology, we're working with some really cool technologies in the background. So we use serverless frameworks. We use GraphQL for our API. We use, well, Our data is on AWS because that's where we felt that there's the most credibility and the most consumer trust, especially in some pockets. But at the end of the day, we believe that where the data is should be the consumer's choice. Some people trust certain companies more than others. Blockchain we're piloting with as an audit trail. So for example, when I share a certain portion of my data, let's say with a bank, I worked in fintech in the past, so then how can the bank trust the data that I shared with them? So if we can have an audit trail that runs in parallel, that shows that this data came from this source and it hasn't been altered along the way. And those are some of the things that we're working on, but I would love to continue the discussion. So thank you again for the opportunity to talk here with all of you, and thank you for all the presentations before. There's our contact details. Please do continue the discussion and we'd love to chat more.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. Yeah, there were, I think, 2 more questions that I saw. Maybe you can give a quick answer and then maybe keep others, or take other answers offline. One was from, I think Bruce's question, Paul already answered. Then there was a question from Mali on how do you prevent companies from reusing data offered for, say, one-time use?
That's a great question. So there's a couple of elements to this. One is what data and in what form is made available. That's essentially making sure that what you have to begin with is not sensitive. The way that the sharing works is that we give the person or company that's granted access a key, and then in exchange for that key, they can access an endpoint where they can read this profile. But this profile is actually it stays with the user. Now, yes, the company they can do a screen grab, they can do a picture of this data. Most of it's machine readable, but they could theoretically do that. And that's where we have different types of ways of scrambling the data, adding self-canceling noise to it, so that essentially becomes on its own meaningless. But that's an area where there's many different elements that we rely on, of course, terms of use. We rely on the consumer permission, what they actually granted permission for, as well as in technology, just make sure that you cannot break that trust that the consumer has given you.
All right. I think that also answered Brenda's question, if I'm not mistaken.
I think to Brenda's question about companies that need data for a longer time, then, I mean, if you as a user, you land on a site and the site says that, hey, I would need constant access to your data for forever, then, I mean, we're gonna recommend a default, which is gonna say that, you can grant it for now, but we're gonna check in 30 days, and unless you consent to it again, then we're gonna revoke it. But at the same time, it comes down to the consumer, that if you go on a website and the website says that I'm going to need access to all your data for perpetuity, and then the consumer says that, that doesn't sound right. I mean, they're likely not going to say yes. But then, I mean, we also have to work, and this is something that Paul's championing on our side, that we have to work with the defaults and the nudges in terms of how we make sure that we get essentially those types of balances right, that forever is a long time. So a month at a time is a great way to balance that in a month, if it feels good to keep that sharing again for a month, then that's great.
All right. Okay, folks, we are already over time, but Marcus and Paul, this is very cool and very interesting. I think it's and very timely also. It's great to put people back into control of their data, and I hope you can get that paradigm shift going. And I think it's a smart way to go to the people who actually develop the apps and technologists, to give them a framework where they can do that. So I think everyone should have all the presenters' email addresses. So if you have additional questions, please reach out to them directly. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all our presenters for the great presentations and the really awesome work that you're all doing. And we'll be meeting again next week, I believe. And until then, so we'll send out our announcement early next week. Until then, have a good time and stay safe. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.